Hello and welcome to the European Resilience Initiative Center video podcast. Today our guest is Jimmy Rushton. He is an independent Kyiv-based foreign policy and security analyst, and he has authored a story recently on The Telegraph analyzing systematic usage of chemical weapons by Russia in its war in Ukraine. Welcome, Jimmy, to this interview.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having time for this conversation. Look, the systematic usage of chemical weapons sounds something absolutely horrific. Absolutely. Can you read more details?
So for sure. So yes, this story, this investigation really came about based on conversations that I had with Ukrainian soldiers and volunteers when I was spending time on the front lines. And they basically were telling me how they were routinely, almost daily, getting attacked by Russian, Germany drones dropping chemical weapons, predominantly tear agents, so CS gas, but also a tear agent called chloropicrin, also known as PS, which is a far more lethal version of CS, basically. And these attacks are happening, on a daily basis, and not just in one location or on the front, across the front. So from Kharkiv Oblast right down to Zaporizhzhia Oblast, Donetsk Oblast as well, of course. So it really is the case that this is something the Russians are doing as a systematic tactic. It's not just one unit that's gone rogue that's just decided to use a stockpile of CS gas grenades that they've got in their inventory. It's a determined strategy that they're using in order to overcome Ukrainian defenders.
To explain it, make it more understandable for our audience, as far as I understand, the Convention on Prohibition of Chemical Warfare says that even tear gas, the same gas which police can use like during the riots, for example, in the streets of a city, but even this tear gas is absolutely banned for usage during the war. So that is why it is a chemical warfare, despite the fact it's not like some nerve agent which instantly kills people like Zarine or Taboon or other weapons. It is still chemical warfare, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's explicitly covered under the Chemical Weapons Convention. Even before the Chemical Weapons Convention came into force in 1997, there were still numerous Geneva Conventions which outlawed the use of chemical weapons, like tear gas. And tear gas is a chemical weapon. It's just a chemical weapon that is, allowed to be used by riot police in certain circumstances. Obviously, when riot police use it, they use it in open areas. They always deploy it when a crowd has the opportunity to disperse, because the idea of using tear gas is that you force a crowd to disperse. And typically, you only use tear gas in extremely, difficult situations. And obviously, some police forces use it more readily than others. The British police, for example, it's never used in the mainland UK. So, for example, if there's a riot in London, the police don't use tear gas because it's viewed to be too dangerous to use. So, it's a dangerous chemical weapon, especially when it's used in tight, confined areas. Especially when it's used. The Russian tactic is essentially to use tear gas to deploy it directly into Ukrainian fighting positions, dugouts. They will then force the Ukrainian soldiers to leave their dugouts, in which case they're attacked by drones dropping conventional grenades, artillery, small arms. So it's not just the lethality of these agents, in greater or lesser lethality of these agents. It's also the fact that they're being followed up by conventional weapons. That's what makes them so dangerous.
Exactly, and also you have mentioned chlorpicrin, and we know that chlorpicrin, while being heated to certain degrees, can also produce such toxic gases which can lead to lethal effect, or the overdosage of this tear gas can also lead to blindness or to death. But this is not the first case. Like, it's not in 2024 when the Russians started to use it. We have recorded evidence of that since the siege of Azov in Azovstal in early 22, and we have seen these cartridges of the Russian tear gas grenades why is it not an issue on the international area?
It's a very good question, and you're right. It's not something that's new. Really, the one thing that is new, at least in my experience, is it's become far more systematic now. Before, it wasn't as widespread, and I think as the war's become more positional and it's really devolved into trench warfare, in many cases. The kind of conditions which saw the use of chemical weapons, in World War One, have been replicated in Ukraine, and chemical weapons were, in some cases, relatively effective in the First World War, and they have been, unfortunately, relatively effective, at least according to the Ukrainian soldiers that I've talked to, when the Russians deploy them against the Ukrainian soldiers. The Russians don't do this because they just have these weapons lying around. They're in some cases, Russian military units are specifically requesting these weapons from the command structures, the Chemical Weapons Corps in the Russian army, and they're using them because they're effective. They cause, not only do the physiological effects, but they also cause panic amongst Ukrainian soldiers, because obviously Ukrainian soldier in a trench in Donetsk is not going to know what chemical weapon is being dropped on him. If you're at a riot and the police deploy CS gas, you know what it is. Almost certainly, it's not going to be lethal. Whereas if you're a Ukrainian soldier and you're in a dugout and a Russian drone comes and drops a grenade that starts spewing this noxious gas at you, you have no idea what it is. It could be CS, it could be something far more nasty. So, yeah, the psychological element is huge. It works. And yeah, it's unfortunately that's why they're doing it. It's because it works.
Exactly, and that is also one of the reasons why tear gas has been banned by international conventions, because it can camouflage the usage of other way more deadly substances, and or at least lower the awareness of a soldier, so they will not put a gas mask on them saying, okay, it's just tear gas, I will not use my gas mask, and then a nerve agent comes out of the gas grenade. But when we're talking about the protective measures used by the Ukrainian army, is Ukrainian army fully equipped with gas masks and with other equipment to fight back this usage?
No, as I said in the article, unfortunately, a lot of Ukrainian soldiers only have, if they have gas masks at all, they only have older ex-Soviet gas masks, which aren't particularly effective in many cases. And some of these gas masks have filters which contain asbestos. A lot of this equipment has been stored for decades before it was pulled out of storage and used in this war. So they don't have modern protective equipment. In a lot of cases, brigades have to fundraise, rely on volunteers to provide them with gas masks and filters. And indeed, the volunteer group that I've spent time with at the front, they were supplying a lot of gas mask filters to Ukrainian units, because again, that's another thing about chemical weapon protection equipment. A gas mask only works if it has a filter, and filters only work for a certain amount of time when they're exposed to a chemical agent. So you have to replace the filters relatively frequently. And some Ukrainian soldiers that we talked to said that their gas mask filters only last for about 30 minutes when they're exposed to some of these chemical agents the Russians are using. So they need to have modern gas masks. They need to have a steady supply of filters as well, because again, it's happening on a daily basis in many cases.
Indeed. And we're talking to Jimmy Rushton. He's a Kyiv-based independent foreign policy and security analyst, and he has recently published his study on The Telegraph about how Russia systematically uses chemical warfare against the Ukrainian army along the front line from Kharkiv to Donetsk and to Zaporizhia. Jimmy, you have already mentioned this problem with the old filters and equipment, etc. But the problem would not have been appeared if the West would have been consequent. And we know that the US President Joe Biden said early this full-scale invasion in 2022 that using chemical warfare against the Ukrainian army would be a huge breach of all rules, and Russia will face severe consequences. It never happened.
No, it didn't. And unfortunately, this is just another, instance of an American president setting down a red line in regards to chemical weapons and seeing that red line crossed and then really not doing anything about it. We saw it in Syria when Bashar al-Assad used sarin nerve agent against his own people. And now we're seeing it in Ukraine. I mean, obviously, I think in some cases the administration is saying, well, it's only CS gas, it's only it's only tear agent. Sorry, so it's not really a chemical weapon. But again, it is. It's a scheduled chemical weapon under the Chemical Weapons Convention. And if they're saying that that part of the Chemical Weapons Convention doesn't apply, then they should just be honest and say that, because what we're seeing, in my opinion, is a slow degradation of the Chemical Weapons Convention, because we're seeing countries like Syria, like Russia, flouting this convention, using chemical warfare, and they're using it because it's effective. It's effective as a psychological weapon, as a physiological weapon, and it's the usage is not getting punished. So why wouldn't you use it if you felt it brought you a military benefit and there was no downsides to using it? Because at the moment there's no downside to the Russians to use these substances in Ukraine at all.
Indeed, that would be the same when they say, okay, you may not use nuclear weapons, but if it is up to 5 kilotons, it's not a nuclear weapon. Or if you use it in a form of like dropping the bomb somewhere in not inhabited area, it's also not the use of nuclear weapon. The convention says pretty clear what is a chemical weapon and what is not. And we have now the situation, but not only the US, also there is no any reactions from the NATO, no any reaction from the United Nations or other institutions. We have an international organization on chemical weapon, the same guys and girls who investigated the Skripal poison case, also usage of chemical weapon on the soil of a NATO member state. Do they say anything?
There has been protests lodged at the OPCW, but unfortunately they are, I would say they're an organization which is, they have a lot of inertia, and it takes a lot to get them moving. According to some people I've spoken to off the record on background, who were associated with the OPCW, their position is they can't really get into Ukraine to investigate these things, so they're relying on submissions from member states. And I know that the United States, the Netherlands, the UK have protested. Obviously, Ukraine as well have protested at the OPCW, but we're really not seeing anything effective in regards to process from them. And to be honest, they've proven themselves to be relatively toothless, unfortunately. And I can't see any. At the UN, I can't see anything happening. Russia has veto power at the Security Council, and I mean the General Assembly could, symbolically denounce Russia, but again, that would be symbolic, and it wouldn't have any effect. In my opinion, the most effective thing that the international community, Western countries, could do is to supply protective equipment to the Ukrainian soldiers to try and mitigate the effects of these Russian attacks, because they're not going to stop. So what we can do is provide the best protection that we can to Ukrainian soldiers that have to suffer them.
And besides that, like you have said that Ukraine has already protested, and the international organization on banning the chemical weapon has sent investigators to investigate the case. Like, what kind of proofs do Ukrainians have in their hand?
Well, I don't think they've sent any investigators to Ukraine. I think they're, as far as I'm aware, their stance is the fact that this is taking place in an active conflict zone. It's too dangerous for their investigators to get to the sites to investigate what's happening. I mean, there is some. They do have a point there. I mean, what happens typically is the Russians drop these grenades in advance of offensive operations. So they'll drop it on a trench. They'll then take that territory. So any form of forensic investigation is very, very difficult. But the Ukrainians provided a K-51 gas grenade to myself that was then verified by Michael Blum, who's an ex-member of the OPCW. The Russians have admitted doing this. There's a segment on Russian state television on Russia 1 last year that detailed an operation where Russia was deploying CS gas against Ukrainian positions. The 801st Black Sea Naval Infantry Brigade, they also posted on Telegram saying that they did this. So, we have enough evidence, right? The evidence is not just testimonies from Ukrainian soldiers. We have Russian sources admitting that they're doing this. We have physical evidence in regards to, recovered chemical grenades. So yeah, regardless of Russia still denies that they're doing this. They point the finger at Ukrainians. They say, it's Ukraine doing this, but there's evidence coming from their own mouths that say that they're doing this, and also they say they're doing this because it's effective. Again,
exactly. That is what they do all the time. They document their own crimes. They have filmed executions of the Ukrainian prisoners of war and posted them on Telegram. They have filmed on their own state television how they loaded cluster bombs to their bombers in Syria and sent them to bomb the civilians. They have recorded everything. Even Vladimir Putin gave his TV statement on how they kidnap Ukrainian children and bring them to Russia. That is why he has received a warrant, an arrest warrant from the International Court, from the International Criminal Court, because he has said it on his own state TV that he is doing that. But on the further development of this chemical warfare usage by Russia, is there any danger of further escalation, like after tear gas comes something else?
Well, we've already seen potential reports of an agent similar to or hydrogen cyanide. So that's, again, in my story, I spoke to Rebecca Makriowski. She's an American combat medic. She's serving with the Ukrainian army around Donetsk, in Donetsk Oblast. And she attended an attack in March 2023 where a Russian drone dropped 2 munitions on a Ukrainian fighting position. The gas had this bitter almond smell, which is characteristic of hydrogen cyanide. And it caused 14 casualties, 2 of which were fatal. The other soldiers that were exposed to this gas had to be hospitalized within 3 days of exposure. And obviously, I can't independently verify this. She was the attending medic at the time. Kyiv Central Prosecutor's Office confirmed that 1 death was caused in Donetsk by an unknown gas. So at least one of these deaths was apparently confirmed. It's obviously incredibly difficult to know exactly what killed a specific Ukrainian soldier, because unfortunately so many Ukrainian soldiers are getting killed right now. And any form of forensic investigation is essentially impossible because it's an active war zone. It's incredibly dangerous, and there's restrictions on where reporters can go, where NGO workers can go as well. So, but I do think that, obviously, if they keep getting away with the use of CS gas, they will, and chlorpicrin, they will start using other agents if they haven't already. I think they probably have already. It's just not, we haven't been able to prove it beyond the balance of probabilities, beyond all reasonable doubt. Yeah.
Absolutely, because impunity just provokes Putin. We know it from all the patterns of his behavior in the past. If he goes away with lesser crime, he continues to raise the stakes and goes further and further, testing our patience and thinking, okay, if this is effective, why not using it? I want to win this war. Anyway, are there any ways for Ukraine to stop this madness?
No, there's no way for them to stop the Russian use of chemical weapons, because the delivery systems are drones, consumer drones mainly, dropping small gas grenades. So there's no centralized delivery system, or specific unit that is responsible for these attacks. It's across the front line, so there really is no way for them to stop them militarily. And I don't think Russia is going to be. They're not going to stop doing these as a result of diplomatic pressure, because they don't care. And obviously, it's worth pointing out that they've used chemical weapons outside their own borders and outside of Ukraine. They in Salisbury, obviously, they used Novichok nerve agent. They also used Novichok in their first attempt to kill Navalny. So using far more lethal agents than tear agents are something that Russia has done already. So I don't think they have any moral reason to not use these more lethal agents in Ukraine either.
Indeed, and we know that once they demonstrated success in one operation or another, they want to scale it up. But behind like any delivery of these chemical agents, of these canisters with gas, there are concrete officers who organize this request, who write this request, who organize the delivery. Can we at least identify their names, as we know who, for example, programmed the Russian missiles which bomb Ukrainian civilians, or the names of the Russian pilots of the strategic aviation bombers who launched these missiles? Can we find these guys who are responsible for the first usage of chemical warfare in Europe since the World War One?
Potentially. I think that there are so many Russian war crimes that have been committed in Ukraine. This would just be another one. We've seen so many mass executions, strikes on civilian targets, civilian infrastructure. So I'm sure that if there was individuals that we could prove, or the Ukrainian government could prove that were responsible for either delivering or ordering chemical weapons attacks on Ukrainian soldiers, I'm sure there would be potential legal repercussions at an international level. But at that point, again, we're coming back to are we ever going to get these people into a court? Probably not, because we've seen the jurisdiction of international courts, although they are they're wide ranging. It's actually physically getting these people into a position where you can actually try them that's the difficult thing, because Russia is obviously never going to extradite them. So yes, potentially we could identify them, but there's a long list of Russian war criminals that we need to identify, unfortunately.
Indeed, and the list of Russian crimes is almost endless in Ukraine, as you have rightfully mentioned: execution and torturing of prisoners of war, execution and torturing of civilians, kidnapping, rape, mass organized rape, destruction of civilian infrastructure, from water dams to power plants, bombing schools, bombing facilities of the Red Cross, etc., etc.
Yeah.
So the chemical gas usage the chemical weapon usage, is just another example of Russian ruthlessness. Thank you so much. It was Jimmy Rushton. He is a Kyiv-based independent foreign policy and security analyst, and he has authored a research on how Russia systematically uses chemical warfare in its genocidal war against Ukraine. Thank you, Jimmy.
Thank you.
And don't forget to like, to share, to subscribe to this channel. Wait for the next interviews, even if the topics are not the very optimistic ones like this one.